بسم الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله تعالى على سيدنا محمد عبده ورسوله النبي الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث بالتمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم، والدعاء على الخير الدلالة على الهدى ابتغاء وجهه سبحانه وتعالى وثوابه وقربه. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحان الله بحمده سبحان الله العظيم. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد ولك الساري ومددك الجاري واجمعنا به في كل أطوارنا وعلى آله وصحبه النور عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلمات عدد كل حرف كتب ويكتب وقرئ ويقرأ وسمع ويسمع ورؤي ويرى أبد الآبدين ودهر الداهرين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Inshallah, continuing our lessons في توجيه نبيل مرضات باريه الحبيب عمر بن محمد بن سالم بن حفيظ بن شيخ أبو بكر بن سالم. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward all of the scholars, the awliya, the people, the du'at, all of those who have lived their lives, struggled and strove to ensure that the legacy was passed on from one generation to the next. Knowledge, what type of a quality is knowledge? What is knowledge? When they say knowledge is preferable over supererogatory worship, what is knowledge? Knowledge is a quality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is Al-Alim, right? So knowledge has a quality of jalal, it has a quality of strength. And so when it manifests in a person, naturally what will it become? If a person does not undergo tarbiyah, spiritual training, purification of the heart, and knowledge enters into this person, most generally, right, it will lead to pride, it will lead to arrogance. So, because why, when a person gets knowledge, there is this feeling that I know. And especially if a person realizes that they know more, or they think they realize that they know more than other people, it leads to arrogance. And that is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, when He speaks about the history of human beings, He says, كَانَ النَّاسُ أُمَّةً وَاحِدًا. Humankind or mankind or everyone was one nation. فَبَعَثَ اللَّهُ النَّبِيِّينَ مُبَشِّرِينَ وَمُنذِرِينَ. Then Allah sent messages as givers of glad tidings and as warners. Right? And then the verse goes on to say, فَمَا اخْتَلَفُوا إِلَّا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَهُمُ الْعِلْمِ. They did not differ amongst themselves until knowledge came to them. بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُمْ. There's the disease. Knowledge ought to bring people closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It ought to bring people on the right path. It ought to unite people. But Allah says, they didn't differ amongst themselves except after knowledge came to them. Meaning when a person gets knowledge, it's going to lead him down the path of destruction. بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُمْ. This was because of high-handedness over each other. One thinks that they know more than the other. My opinion is better than your opinion. Right? And so therefore this knowledge has to be coupled with the spiritual purification of the heart. The knowledge of the spiritual purification of the heart. Right? Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the verse further down, فَهَدَى اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اخْتَلَفُوا فِيهِ مِنَ الْحَقِّ بِإِذْنِهِ. Then Allah guided those whom He willed through His permission to the truth in those affairs in which they differed. And so therefore one of the hallmarks of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that they are guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to maneuver through the differences and the disputes and the argumentations and the chaos that is happening around them in society, in the circles, and like a hair being pulled out of flower, their path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is guided. And so therefore knowledge, when we speak about knowledge being superior to nafil ibadah and worship, it's that knowledge which leads you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's that knowledge which rectifies your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala across the spectrum, from all the Islamic sciences up to and including the knowledge of the purification of the heart. And there's no one that explains these concepts better than Imam al-Ghazali in his Ihya Ulumuddin. And obviously it needs to be something that is read constantly over and over and over again. So yesterday Habib Umar was speaking about the necessity of emulating the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum in their states, right, in their stations and in their lives, and how they related to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how they related to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and also how they related to the Quran. We find in the month of Ramadan, in the month of the Quran, if we read the lives of the Sahaba and how they recite the Quran. Right, Sayyidina Ikrimah bin Abi Jahl, before he would even open the Quran, he would just be holding it in his hands, right? And the reverence and awe of what he was about to do. He would say, هَذَا كَلَامُ رَبِّي هَذَا كَلَامُ رَبِّي. He'd put it on his head and he'd faint. This is the speech of my Lord, this is the speech of my Lord, and he'd faint. Sayyidina Tamim al-Dari would spend the entire night reciting just one particular verse over and over and over and over again, right? Many of the other Sahaba, we find that they would recite the Quran. There was a Sahaba who used to recite the Quran, and there was a cloud that descended outside his home, and his horses became agitated. When he asked the Prophet ﷺ, he said, those are the angels that descended to listen to your recitation. And so the Sahaba, when you study their different lives, just how they related to the Quran, we can write a book about relating to the Quran from the lives of the Sahaba. Their salah also, another story. Their fasting, their charity. So the entire corpus of the practices of Islam, we need to be able to know the stories of the Sahaba. One of the great things which Habib Alawi bin Muhammad bin Shihab, who was Habib Umar's, the father of Habib Umar's teacher, right, one of the great Imams of Hadramaut, he would encourage people, or when he used to exhort and he used to speak especially to the youth, he would say, how many stories have you memorized of your ancestors? Meaning the pious, because the ancestors of the Sada al-Ba'ali, all the great Imams. Right? So how many stories have you memorized of the Sahaba? We can ask ourselves. Off the cuff, if you have to speak about, let's say this particular Sahaba, how many stories can you tell about him? How much information do you have? The other night we read the names of the Ashab al-Badr. Right? And I was reading the names, realizing we don't know half of these. We don't know 3/4 of all these names. These are the most powerful souls in the universe after the prophets. From the 313 Sahaba who took part in the Battle of Badr, how many do we actually know? Besides the Khulafa al-Rashidin and maybe the Ashra al-Mubashirin bil Jannah, right? There's about 6 or 7 Sahaba who took part in the Battle of Badr whose name was Haritha. What differentiate? Which one? When you hear a story of the Sahaba of Sayyidina Haritha, which one are they referring to? Right? And this ought to be the focus of our attention. A person needs to do research about the Sahaba, who are the different Sahaba in their lives. Memorize stories. And so there shouldn't be the name of a Sahaba that is mentioned except that a believer has some information about him. At least if we're saying the famous Sahaba, then at least 10 stories a person should be able to bring to mind, at the very least. And if it's Sahaba who are not so common, and look at if you want to look at it, how sincere the people of Badr were, is that they're not even known. We don't even know. We know their names, but we know nothing about their states. We know nothing about. When I say know nothing, it's just because we haven't actually researched. If you go into the books, we'll actually be able to find out. And the scholars of the past, they spent and they documented the names and lives of all the Sahaba that have existed, as much as they could count. Obviously, the Sahaba went into the hundreds, maybe 100,000, 120,000, some say. Recorded names, we have about 12 to 14,000. And these are just in the books of Hadith. Those whom Hadith were related from. Those obviously that are not in the books of Hadith are also plentiful. And then when you're studying the lives of the Sahaba as well, not just with regards to their their own personal lives, but their interactions and the marriages between the different families of the Sahaba. They're very interrelated as well. And this one would be the father-in-law of this one, and this one would be the son-in-law of that one, and they're famous Sahaba. And then tracing the offspring. The Prophet ﷺ, he made dua for certain Sahaba, and he made dua, for example, a child was brought to him by one of the Sahaba, and the Prophet ﷺ made dua for him. The historians, then what do? They go and they trace the story of that son to see how did the Prophet ﷺ's dua affect his life, and the manifestation of the dua of the Prophet ﷺ on that particular Sahabi's life. Right? They say Sayyidina Umar bin Abdul Aziz, if I'm not mistaken, his mother, right? His mother, if I'm not mistaken, his mother or his grandmother was the person whom we know the famous story of Sayyidina Umar when he was doing his rounds at night, and then he hears this woman telling her daughter, mix the milk with water, and she says, but this is not right. She says, Umar can't see us, and she says, but Allah sees. What did Sayyidina Umar do? He went and he went and told his son that that's the girl I want you to get married to. And from that union was either the son or the grandson who Sayyidina Umar bin Abdul Aziz, the great Khalifa of Islam. And so studying the lives of the Sahaba is not only just for information as well, you see the effects of what their lives have. And when we do this, and when we study the lives of the Sahaba, the purpose is to learn how to implement and how to emulate. In today's day and age, people want to get their daughters and their sons married, right? Look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and we always mention this as well. The Prophet ﷺ brought Sayyidina Ali into his household when he was still a young boy, to make sure that he would have a hand in the tarbiyah of Sayyidina Ali, because obviously no one would be worthy of the hand of Sayyidina Fatima except someone who the Prophet ﷺ had manufactured himself. And so if you're bringing your son up or you're bringing your daughter up in a good and an Islamic way, right? Obviously these are not planned things, but there has to be a conceptual understanding of what is the type of qualities in a spouse I would like for my son or my daughter, and start playing a role in that, in training that particular individual or that particular. And the reason, obviously because these things are not planned and no one can actually make decisions for their children, that are very, very long term. Therefore it's important that the society exists in that particular way, right? One of the things also when they talk about emulating the Sahaba, and is giving impetus for people to raise their children up, right? The Mashayikh would say that Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam and Sayyidina Imam Mahdi radiallahu ta'ala anhum, we know that they will appear. And the hadith states that they will get married from this ummah, right? So how many people encourage their daughters, if not just as a form of encouragement, to say it's possible that you could be the wife of Imam Mahdi, of Isa alayhi salam. So be careful how you live your life. Don't do things which will cause you not to be able to not reach that particular level, because obviously they will marry from those who are the epitome of piety in their lifetimes. Now imagine bringing up a daughter with that's her goal. And if it doesn't happen, you get the reward for the intention, and at least she's lived a pious life, and Allah will not cause her to lose out. She'll find, inshallah, a pious husband from amongst his companions or his disciples or those that would come after him. And so this is the himmah, this is the determination that comes from when a person studies the lifetime or the lives of the Sahaba. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for every day and age, for every person in every situation, He will inspire a person with the correct course of action. Many times the students, after they have studied or they are graduating, right, and Habib Umar mentioned this in his book Maqasid al-Halaqat, because many times we want to copy and paste solutions for different situations. So we study, for example, a person might study in a certain locality or a certain country, and there's ways in which things are done. So they think, but now when I go to my country, what should I do? When I do this, what should I do? And Habib Umar gave a very important qa'idah, right? And it's also a very consoling qa'idah, right? He said, "As-sadiq yulhimhu Allahu rushdahu." The truthful person, Allah will inspire him with his correct course of action. You've done the work, right? Or you're doing the work and you're sincere, what you need to do at the particular time in your life, the courses, the decisions, right? Allah will guide you through that. And so therefore it's important to always be connected to the legacy at all times, so that your thought processes can also be guided. If we are not, if our brains and minds, our faculties of understanding are not molded in the framework of what the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, the great masters, it means the guidance is not going to come, right? You can only be guided through a thought processes if you understand very, very broadly what those parameters of interactions are. And so when you make the lives of the Sahaba, especially even just reading the biographies, is one of the greatest ways of bringing up children as well. Because stories are the armies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself in the Quran tells us many, many stories. And when he tells the stories, right, what does he tell the Prophet? We have related these stories to you لِنُثَبِّتَ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ, so that we may strengthen your heart. You want to create resolve in your children, tell them the stories of the pious, of the Sahaba. And the best way to do tarbiyah of children is not to tell them do this, don't do that, and hit them and shout them. Just read the stories of the Sahaba. Any person who reads a story, right, which is a paragon of virtue or a moral of perfection, naturally human instinct wants to emulate perfection. So just read the stories of how these particular Sahaba or this pious person never missed a salah in their life, right? You come across in the Risala al-Qushayriyah, one of the great awliya is telling the story. He says, I went to buy fish in the marketplace, and there's a young boy, and he's selling the fish. As soon as I give him the money, adhan goes. He says, take it for free. The adhan is went, I'm not allowed to take. He says, no, but I still want this. And I say, sorry, it's time for salah. He closes his shop and he goes. He says, he's supposed to be someone who's pious. He says, I'm waiting for him to come back from salah, right? When he came back, he still refused to take the money. He said, no, and if adhan went, I'm not allowed to take that. We hear a story like that, automatically what happens? We look at our relationship with salah, right? And so therefore stories are a very, very, very powerful way of doing tarbiyah, not just of children, but of people. And we need to get back to telling the stories of the Sahaba. All these social media and this and that, very, very few people use social media to tell the stories of the pious, stories of the Sahaba, anecdotes which will actually encourage people to do good and to improve their lives. وقال رضي الله تعالى عليكم بذل غاية جهدكم في تبليغ الخلق أمر الخالق. It is imperative that you expend your utmost efforts in conveying to the creation the law or the command of their creator. The person has to expend their utmost efforts, use all their resources available to convey the message. وَتَفَانِيكُمْ فِي تَوَاضِعُكُمْ وَذِلَّتِكُمْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. وَتَفَانِيكُمْ meaning being completely annihilated. You don't even recognize your own ego, your own self, right? Completely lost in what? فِي تَوَاضِعُكُمْ, in your humility, in your humbleness, putting yourself down, لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ, in front of the believers. If you want to be involved in da'wah, one of the most destructive things in da'wah is the ego. You want to teach people, or you want to go and convey the message to people, but you are still full of ego, you're still noticing yourself. Habib says you have to come to a point where you don't recognize that you even exist. And the stage that what is known as fana is that you don't see yourself as having any independent power. I'm doing this, whatever, it's not even me doing it, Allah is doing it. Right? You want to say Allah is using me, but you say Allah is using me, you still have an element of me or ana in it. Allah is doing it. I don't have anything to do with that affair. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can choose anyone to do it. So completely losing yourself in humbleness and putting yourself down in front of the believers. Because the purpose of the da'wah is not to show people that I'm the one doing it or I'm the one conveying the message. The purpose of the da'wah is how can it be done such that the person to whom it is being conveyed will be most apt to receive it and most accepting of it. And this goes into the fiqh of da'wah. So sometimes it might not be the right time to advise someone because they're not willing to or they're not in the stage to actually accept that particular message. Right? Sometimes da'wah means that you just leave people and you don't even speak to them about something. Sometimes da'wah might be when you see someone who's even doing something wrong, that you merely just greet them and treat them amicably and try to create some sort of relationship. When when advice can be given directly to people is when there's a very, very high level of trust. If there's not a high level of trust, if you try and advise someone, generally the ego is going to reject it, because the ego doesn't like to be told what to do. And this is a very, very, very important point. In Tareem, for example, one of the difficulties that Westerners have when they come, and some of them even they would stand up on the Thursday night and they'll talk and they'll address sometimes the Mashaykh and they'll address the people. If you see me doing anything wrong, please tell me. I've been living here for 1 year and no one's been telling me. I only realized later that I'm doing something wrong. And that is the way of the tarbiyah. Right? They say, Al-aqilu takfihi al-ishara. An intelligent person, an indication is sufficient to him. Right? So in Tareem, for an example, there's a guy who comes, and so generally in front of the teacher, the student won't wear the jubbah, right? And you don't wear a big imama in front of your teacher, especially if your teacher is not wearing his imama. But generally in your student, you don't wear the jubbah. So one guy, he just arrives in Tareem, right? And because now he's so enamored with Tareem and the Habib, so from day one when he arrives, he's got his big imama, he's got his jubbah, and he hasn't any knowledge. He's only starting the path. Now they even all have sunglasses, So he's sitting in the class and he's got his jubbah and his whatever, and the teachers, now the students, everyone sees him. Right? If we're in South Africa, what would happen? No one says a word to him. Not even his friends, no one says a word to him. The teacher, obviously, you can notice on the teacher's face whenever he sees him, the teacher greets him, Assalamu alaikum, smiles at him. But the smile has something behind it. And the lessons are going on and going on and going on, right? 2, 3, 4, 5 months, 6 months. Then the lesson comes on the etiquette of in one of the books that is being taught. For example, Habib also speaks about the way they tie their turbans. There's different folds. So when do you have 3 folds? When do you have 5 folds? When do you have 7 folds? When do you have 9 folds? Generally 10 folds would be for someone who has reached the level of mufti. So just by the number of folds, you can actually tell which book he's read in fiqh. So Habib says, if you've done the minhaj, then this person will be allowed to have 7 folds. If they've reached the level of ifta, then they would have 10 folds. And this was actually a practice of the Islamic legacy, even in Al-Azhar. Right? The mashayikh were known by their dress. Why? So that when they walked in society, people knew who to ask, right, for ifta, for questions. And so therefore it was understood and respected that this particular dress would be for ulama who are on the level of ifta, and this particular is for a person, for example, who's maybe on a different level. So also with the jubbah. So then it comes to the point, and you're reading in the book, and it is not appropriate for the student to wear a jubbah in front of the teacher. And the student, you just see his face change, and he starts becoming smaller, and right? And the next day he comes, is he wearing his jubbah? He's not wearing his jubbah, right? And no one says anything to him. And life goes on. But he himself, if you meet him now at his home, he's like, Astaghfirullah, I was doing this for so long, no one even told, why didn't anyone speak to me? Why didn't anyone tell? This is what tarbiyah is about. Because if people are not ready for that change, they're not going to make that change. And sometimes you can tell, hey, this is not, this is not the adab, this is not the way things ought to be done here, right? Depending on his ego, he might accept it or not accept it. He might do it, but there'll be a bit of resentment. But when it comes from himself, this is a change which will remain. Now that same concept needs to be taken when anything that you want to encourage anyone else about, whether it is salah, whether it's someone that's even involved in things which are disliked. And as parents especially, right, or as guardians or people, you have students, you have to accept the fact that you are going to see your children make mistakes and perhaps even fall into sins. That's the nature of human beings. One of the mistakes we make as parents and as guardians or people in charge is we want everyone to be perfect. We want everyone to be on the character of the Prophet. We hold people to the character of the Prophet ﷺ. And he's not, but he's not doing this. The prophetic way is this particular way. He's not the Prophet, right? So we have to have that understanding and that capacity to say that and this is the meaning of وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغِ. The meaning of it is our duty is only to convey the message, right? Is to do it in a way which will allow a person to change in their own time. It might take a few days, it might take a few weeks, it might take a few months, it might take a few years, right? But that's the patience required with da'wah. One of the biggest qualities of the da'wah is patience and not wanting to rush to see results. And if you entrust the fear to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah has guidance for every person written at particular times and at different levels and different stages in their life. And when you spend time with a person can only understand this if you see it happening in front of you. And there's many stories that can be told about this. All the students that study under the Shaykh, right, they will say that their tarbiyah happens through what? The tarbiyah happens through their gaze. Just when they gaze at you, automatically you feel, you know what, your mind starts racing, and you hit a point, this is not right or that's not right. Right? Sometimes just with the way that they can be smiling at you, but you can read volumes behind that smile, what's being intended. And this is not strange, because science says even tortoises, right, do the tarbiyah of their children, of the children of tortoises with their gaze. Snakes, we know, also have a very powerful gaze. If you ever stared a snake in the eye, if you feel there's an effect that gets to your heart. So the gaze is a very powerful form of tarbiyah. And try it with your children as well. They do something wrong, just keep a straight face and look at them. Automatically they'll stop and they'll go and they'll do something else. And we have to learn to use these soft forms of tarbiyah. We say soft because in comparison to hitting and shouting, but this is actually more powerful than that. And obviously hitting and shouting, and that has its place in the Islamic tarbiyah, specifically for things which are detrimental. For example, so when we read the lives of the awliya, we say that in their homes they never got upset unless the sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was transgressed. But a cup broke or something happened or something, it wouldn't affect them. But if the sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then within the sharia there's different things. So if the child, he's not Bārīh, but he hasn't read salah, right? You don't need to hit them unless they've reached the age of 10, and the Prophet ﷺ then gives sanction, and also the type of hitting that you need to be doing. So tarbiyah, how to actually do da'wah in tarbiyah. When you talk of tarbiyah of children, you're also talking of tarbiyah of other people in society. This itself is a science. There is a fiqh behind it. There are principles that need to be understood. There are qawaid, there are foundations that need to be established, for which a person needs to then operate within that framework. And if you don't, then the da'wah is all just manifestation of our own spiritual diseases. وَاعْتِقَادُكُمْ أَنَّهُمْ خَيْرٌ وَأَفْضَلُ مِنْكُمْ. And so after losing yourself and being humble in front of people, especially the believers, right, and putting yourself down in front of them, وَاعْتِقَادُكُمْ أَنَّهُمْ خَيْرٌ وَأَفْضَلُ مِنْكُمْ. And bringing certainty and belief, it must be a creedal understanding in you that they are better and more virtuous than you, right? How do you give da'wah to someone who is perhaps doing something wrong or is in sin, but thinking that they are better than you? Perhaps Allah is just using me as a means for their tawbah, and they will make such a great tawbah that Allah will raise them to a station higher than I am, and then I would have to go and sit at their feet and learn from. Is there a problem in doing that? No, because for who are we doing? Are we doing da'wah so that we can establish ourselves? No, right? We don't know whom Allah will use, and this has happened. And this has happened in the past. If we just look at, many times we mention, if we look at the field of da'wah in the West, the names of people who are at the forefront of da'wah, all these names are people who are revert Muslims to Islam. What happened to all the Muslims who were in those countries? And we find now that Muslims themselves living in those countries are coming and learning from. Reverse 20 years ago, that same Muslim might have looked upon that person and said, oh, but he's a disbeliever, or 30 years ago. Or might have even had some interaction with him, right? And now 30 years later, he's the Shaykh of the time, he's the Shaykh of that country. And so we don't have a problem when you do da'wah. In every single person, whether you are doing da'wah or not doing da'wah, you have to believe that the one that you see is even greater than you. Even with regards to your children, you have to do tarbiyah to your children, but you desire your children to be great one day, right? How do you do da'wah and tarbiyah to your children, but you want them to become great ulama and great awliya one day? Right? Perhaps they might be so beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're doing something wrong to them, you're causing destruction for your own self. You're only protected by the huquq, right? By the rights that Allah has given you as a parent over them, right? But one dua of a child can even, right? Allah hears those, hears the du'as of the oppressed. وَاعْتِقَادُكُمْ أَنَّهُمْ خَيْرٌ وَأَفْضَلُ مِنْكُمْ وَشُكْرُ اللَّهِ عَلَى نِعْمَةِ الْإِتِّصَالِ بِحِبَالِ رَسُولِهِ وَمُصْطَفَاهِ. And then thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the blessings of this connection, right, through the chains of narration going back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right, and Allah's chosen one. Al-ittisal bihibal, hibal is rope, right? And so when you sit with the mashayikh, it is what you take from them, the knowledge, the states, the nur, that spending time is almost like a rope that they are now extending to you, and you are now holding on to that rope. And Habib says, when you shake or when you take hold of the rope, you are taking hold not just of it from your shaykh, you are taking hold of it from his entire chain going back to the Prophet ﷺ. And he says, if one end of the rope of the chain is moved, the entire chain is moved. And so when you do da'wah with the idhn from the mashayikh, you have the du'as, right, and the gazes and what they call the spiritual assistance, not just of your shaykh, but of each and every single person in your shaykh's chain going back to the Prophet ﷺ. Right? And it's a very powerful concept. When you have to go do da'wah, you have to do da'wah thinking that I've got a very, very powerful support system behind me. So we don't do da'wah in an apologetic manner or in a very weak manner. You have to do da'wah because this, if you believe that Islam is the truth, and if you believe that this is the duty Allah gave you with, then there has to be also, and this is a form of, this is not pride and arrogance, this is a form of dignity that the da'wah brings. And when you do da'wah in that way, that also has an effect on the one receiving the message. وَالْوُقُوفُ عَلَى أَبْوَابِ الدُّخُولِ عَلَيْهِ, and standing or waiting at the doors of entrance upon him. Right? What are the doors of entrance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? All the different things. For example, salah is a bab of dukhul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Being patient, performing your salah, for example, in the utmost, in the highest form possible to you. Waiting for the door to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open through salah. Right? To approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through your fasting, to approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through your good character, to approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the different forms. You don't know which door Allah will open from you. Right? Just iftiqar, just being in a state of complete brokenness in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one of also the greatest doors to approach Him. وَتَرْجُمَةُ كُلُّ ذَلِكَ فِي مُوَاصَلَةِ السَّعْيِ وَالْعَمَلِ. And you need to translate all of these things that have been mentioned. How? Right? In continuing your efforts and your deeds. So you don't stop. If something happened today which might have you had a bad experience with someone, it doesn't stop you from your da'wah, it doesn't stop you from your ibadah, it doesn't stop you from your efforts. There needs to be, so the translation of all of these qualities which Habib mentioned before is translated through your continuous efforts and your actions and your good deeds. وَضَبْطِ الْخَلَلِ, and correcting and rectifying your mistakes. And a person on the path is always aware and always conscious about trying to realize where his mistakes are and rectifying them. And therefore one of the Imam Ghazali mentions as well, if a person cannot find a shaykh, right, because ultimately the way in the past was, it was the shaykh that makes one aware of their mistakes, makes one aware, not necessarily that they tell you this and that, but the tarbiyah is being done, the example that we've given. But paying attention to what your parents say, and your wife, and your children, right? You're very, very close, especially when you're in arguments and in differences of opinion. Paying attention to what they say. And then also having or setting up something in your home or with your very, very close people where there's an understanding that for this next 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, people are allowed to offload. Right? And just speak to me, what is it that's troubling? What is it about me that you like? What is it about me that you don't like? Just as to be a mirror of reflection. And if we can actually do this, we'll realize that many times people, we are relating to them, we might be doing things which you never crossed your mind that this might be something that is affecting this person negatively. And so there has to be this opportunity that's created in the home, right? Especially with spouses and children and parents as well, where people can offload. And it's understood that in that particular, obviously even when children are speaking, if they're speaking to their parents, in that particular gathering, they're allowed to mention certain things. And there are certain rules or levels which are lowered in that particular gathering, which shouldn't be elsewhere. So for example, parents or children can't speak to their parents that you did this or you did that one particular day or the other day, right? But in that particular meeting, the parents might need to hear that from the children, especially because we have parents today that haven't been brought up on the Islamic paradigm. In knowledge-wise, they might be, today we're living that the children are asking the mashayikh, how do we do tarbiyah of the parents? Because the parents might not be reading salah, or the parents are not doing this, or the parents are not doing that. So it's a unique situation, it's a different situation, right? And there needs to be also strategies to enable people to realize what their faults are. If we're just living our lives day to day and you don't know where your faults are, and the worst thing is to think that I don't have any faults. Every person has faults, but to know what your faults are and to acknowledge them. So with a person's spouse, you can say, I know I do this, I know this is something in me, and I'm working on that particular thing. Just to be able to say that makes the other know that, at least they are aware of this destructive attitude or this destructive quality. And then they need help. The purpose of tarbiyah, the purpose of tasawwuf also as well is not just to overcome our own egos, is to help others overcome their egos. So you don't respond when someone is submitting to their ego, you don't respond. Because if you respond, you're not submitting to your ego. So you don't fight fire with fire. And in the Maidan or in the arena of tarbiyah, it's not about who's right and about who's wrong. It's about how best to quell the ego, how best to just keep shaitan out of the equation from beginning to end. And people make mistakes. This is what the tarbiyah is about. Always apologize, even if you're not wrong, but ask people to tell you and to make you aware. If you try this, when your best friend, or who you think your best friend is, ask them to tell you some of your faults, right? And just look at their response. And then you'll know how easy or how difficult this is, but it'll also be telling about your relationship with that person. Between spouses as well, people are not, there's no amicability to the level where a spouse can tell others, but these are your strong points, these are your weak points. And is there something wrong if someone tells you that, you have a very bad quality, this, that, and the other? Is there something wrong if they tell you something and you know that someone comes to you and says, but you lie a lot, and you're not a liar? Is there something wrong in that? Is there something wrong if someone accuses you of a negative quality which you are sure, or even a sin, but you're not doing that sin? This is obviously in a private setting, not in a public sphere. Sayyidina Hassan al-Basri, right? He was, a woman walked past and he obviously had a very eloquent tongue. And this lady walks past and she sees, and obviously he had a very big effect on people, flowery language, and people would be humbled in his gathering. So an old woman walks past and she tells him, she screams, Ya Murahi, oh you show off. So he comes to her and he says, Allah has made you aware of my fault, please conceal it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Did he tell her, no, I've been working on my nafs and I'm when they hear, right, people even accuse them of something, even though it might not be there, they look deeper and say, perhaps there's something hidden that I hadn't actually known. And if it's there, if it's not true, Allah knows it's true and that's sufficient. And if it is true, obviously then a person needs to. And so they say people speak, who moves people to speak against you? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so there are also lessons that a person can take in everything. The way the universe responds to you is Allah's talking to you. And you need to take lessons in all of that, in everything that what happens to you on a day-to-day basis, right? Every single second and a split second of things that happen to you, who caused that to happen to you? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So those are Allah's messages to you, because the only concern is your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَضَبْطِ الْخَلَلِ. And so rectifying the mistakes لأن النتيجة تكون في الغالب لنفع الناس مناسبة لنية الواصل إليهم عنهم, because generally the effect, right, of being able to benefit people will be according to the intention of the one who was bringing the message to them. If the intention was sincere, then the effect will be there, right? If the intention was correct, taking into mind all of these principles and these foundations of da'wah, then the effect will actually be there. And so therefore even the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when they give da'wah and there is no effect, they don't say, oh, these people, there's no good in them. They say, I wasn't sincere. There is a deficiency in my efforts or in my understanding or in my sincerity. Had I been sincere, Allah would have caused the effect to take place. وَالْمُبَلِّغُ لَهُمْ مُنَاسَبَةَ هِمَّتِهِ وَنِيَّتِهِ. And so according to the one who is bringing the message, according to his intention, according to his determination, right? إِذَا ضَعْفَتَ الْهِمَّةِ وَالنِّيَّةِ. If his himma, his determination and his intentions are weak, ضَعْفَتِ الثَّمَرَةُ وَالنَّتِيجَةُ. Therefore the fruits and the result will also be weak. And if it is strong, then the result will be strong. May I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us tawfiq wa akhiran da'wan alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي